All right, welcome back, everyone, to Terraform Time here on the PagerDuty Twitch channel. I'm your host, Scott McAllister, developer advocate here at PagerDuty. This is our weekly show where we talk about all things Terraform and PagerDuty, and maybe just sometimes Terraform. And we're going to welcome Jon Bass. Jon is the CEO of Sym, and he's here to talk to us about access control, right, Jon? You want to talk about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, that's the plan, Scott. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I'm the CEO at Sym, and we're building a very developer and Terraform centric way for folks to manage access and approval workflows. So yeah, I'm excited to kind of dig into that here.
Sweet. Yeah, we're excited to see it. As I've been digging around a little bit since meeting you and learning about what you're doing, it's super intriguing because you're essentially using Terraform as the bridge, right? Like it's the common language that we're all using. And you're basically saying, let's use Terraform to configure this and then to configure your access controls and then also your PagerDuty and then have it all in the same place. Did I learn right?
Yeah, I mean, basically we're using Terraform to manage our infrastructure, to manage our PagerDuty configs, to manage more and more of the kind of backend services that kind of are making our stacks work. And our observation was like, well, there seems to be kind of a gap in terms of a Terraform-based tool to kind of manage the connections and integrations between all these services, especially when it comes to kind of access and approval workflows. So rather than kind of falling back out to, like Jira tickets to kind of manage who can get access to what, well, let's provide a kind of Terraform-based way to do this for all the people that are already kind of have already drank the Terraform Kool-Aid and are using it to manage the resources themselves. So that's what we've been up to.
That's cool. Yeah. And to be honest, I tell people this a lot when I'm talking about Terraform. It's like, I would talk about other things too, and totally into other infrastructures, code tools. Yeah. However, it just seems right now, Terraform is it, right? Like it's really right there as far as like everybody's using it. And it's how people are interfacing with their infrastructure. And so it makes sense to add more and more tools to it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so flexible. So it kind of, what we have found is that for folks that have invested heavily in their Terraform pipelines, great. They use our stuff and it can kind of fit in. People that are just kind of dipping their toes in or use Terraform more lightly, like you don't have to be, a Terraform wizard to get started with our tool, or really with any sort of, if you're, any sort of point solution you're trying to set up with Terraform. So it's flexible. It's in a lot of places. It's well documented. There's lots of support. So it's been a great friend to us as we've been building out Sym for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us a little about give us an introduction, show us how does Sym work?
Yeah, I mean, let's dive in. I'm going to share my screen and all right, sweet. So we'll come back to this later. This is our homepage and some other stuff. And, one of the reasons that one of the exciting things and the reasons why we're here today is also we've got a nice integration with PagerDuty, which we'll get into. But let's just kind of start with okay, well, what is this thing about? I threw out some words about access management and workflows. We'll get into all the Terraform kind of things in a moment. But first, just to kind of make things kind of real, I just want to show kind of what Sym looks like to an end user, to somebody that you're not the person that's using Terraform to build our workflows, but just somebody in your org that is using our workflows. So a lot of times when people start working with us, they have some pain points around access to AWS, and so we often start with as a starter use case. I want a way to kind of manage who gets access to AWS when. So we've got some user here in a hypothetical health organization. They have read-only access, and now they need additional access. And we have this Slack integration. So okay, I'm going to run my Slack access flow here. Why do they need access? So as PagerDuty users are well aware, stuff happens. There's a break glass incident. and people need to respond to something. So, one common pattern that people have is I need, there's something is down. I need to get in. I need access. And then another pattern or category for access is actually more like maybe things aren't down, but I need to respond to something where I need to access sensitive like customer data typically. So, and people want more visibility. When is customer data being accessed in the process of resolving some issue, right? So, those are kind of two common patterns that come up. Fixed ticket, yeah, and then we'll do you can change all this stuff, but let's say we've got a request now for 30 seconds, which is just what we use in a demo. And then, okay, this user, all right, they try to approve this request themselves. They weren't able to do that there. Okay, and now, okay, this other user here, okay, they approve the request, great. And now it says that I have access. And now when I come here, okay, this user has been granted additional AWS privileges for, in this case was 30 seconds. So for an end user, the goal is to have a kind of a lightweight, simple interface that's, Slack based. It also can be API based to request access, or approval to some sensitive resource. In this case, AWS. And, this is the kind of user experience that they get. And now that access is expired. So there's already, even here, like we're going to now jump over, we can start to look at like kind of the Terraform and SDK kind of stuff, which is where there's kind of some fun things. But just to say, in our experience, like there's already a lot of value just in setting up a kind of peer reviewed access flow like this. There's some visibility, in your org, who needs access. They've got to put in a reason in the same kind of way that, a lot of orgs kind of see the value in pull requests and code reviews, and, that there's kind of a collaborative access to kind of managing your stack. What we see from our customers is similarly just value in this kind of basic Slack experience that I just showed. And we've made it really easy for folks to just kind of stand up this basic access experience, kind of, using our tools out of the box.
And they're essentially using it through Slack, right? Because I mean, that's where a lot of us are living. That's where all of work happens. It seems, right? It seems that's where we live, and so it makes sense that that's where they would use Sym, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this interface has been really. I mean, obviously, people have lots of different ways that they're accessing and communicating, collaborating, but Slack there's such a kind of a large group of folks that are in Slack doing their activities in here. And so we found it's just a really effective home for us. As I mentioned, we do have an API though too. So like, if you want to trigger and manage things outside of Slack, we have some capabilities there as well. And we'll be doing more of that as we grow.
Cool.
Well, so this is kind of the user experience, just to kind of create the mental model of like, what are users interacting with our tool, and they can have multiple different access flows, blah, blah, blah. But now let's just jump over, like, let's look at like, well, what is this thing? What does Terraform have to do with this thing? So, all right, if I jump over into the code that provisions this workflow, kind of like the headline is that when you are provisioning a Sym flow, what you're doing is provisioning this Sym flow resource, which is one of the things we ship with our Terraform provider. So basically, our provider lets you declare this new type of resource, a flow, and we've provided a bunch of knobs and levers to kind of make this access and approval flow your own, with like all the different configuration points you might need. The provider has like other resources besides the flow, but basically the whole thing is set up to let you basically configure this flow in just the way you might need to do it. So like at the highest level, this is what Sym is about. It's the fact that I can provision this flow resource and then do a bunch of stuff with it. Now, so the flow has a bunch of declarative parameters, and there's different plugins for the kind of access strategy that you're using. Is it AWS? Is it Okta? Blah, blah, blah. I guess the other kind of key thing with Sym is when we set out on this journey to build this tool, we knew we wanted to be able to manage flows in this kind of declarative way in Terraform using HCL. But we're building a workflow tool, and we knew like, well, if I'm trying to define rules, like, well, if it's Scott who's requesting access, then I don't know, that should get auto approved. If it's Jon that requests access, this should go to this other team. And, just conditional logic that kind of route and manage the kind of flow of what's actually happening in these access and approval workflows. And, we were like, well, we could attempt to represent some of that conditional logic in HCL or in YAML. I mean, people do that. But, we felt like, wouldn't it be more expressive and powerful if you could express that conditional logic in a kind of high level programming language like Python? So, and we chose Python just because it's like such a ubiquitous language. I mean, which is a joke. Python is like a lot of people's like second favorite language. Like a lot of people, people just know in our world, people know Python and they can kind of manage and get around it.
Yep.
So let's just look at that piece of things because that kind of finishes the story. So basically in Python, what you can do is kind of decorate with these hooks, like each step of our workflow. So here we have a hook that's happening on a request. So this is dealing with that like kind of very common case where, okay, great. I just saw this demo of how we can request approval for things and get somebody else to approve it. But if I'm on call and it's 3 a.m, I may be okay with the on-call person kind of automatically getting access. But I would like that to still go through the same guardrails, and maybe I want to, follow up the next day to figure out what happened. And so so there's it's great to have this peer-reviewed access system, but how do you fast track for business cases where that actually really would be helpful and make sense? So that's where this hook concept comes in. So when you have a request, for example, here we've got an implementation, and we'll actually kind of mess around with this thing a little bit. And it says, okay, well, when a request comes in, if this request should be fast tracked, then essentially we're going to short circuit our workflow. So instead of kind of going on to the next step, we're just going to generate a message here and then send that back for approval, automatically. So the combination of being able to kind of declare the flows and then use these hooks to really customize and tune the guardrails in an expressive language like Python is kind of like the kind of magic that we see in terms of what's making Sym effective for people. So the next step, the next step I can do, I don't know, Scott, do you have any questions? I've just been talking for a while.
So just so I'm clear,
yeah.
the Terraform configuration of the flow that you have set up works in conjunction with the Python, or they work together, or they're separate?
They work together.
Okay.
So basically you provision good question. So like you provision the flow, you declare this flow thing. And one of the properties of the flow is that
points to the Python script. Got it. Okay.
Implementation file. And essentially then that you don't have to put stuff in that Python implementation file, but then you can kind of start to manage the steps in that workflow. If you want to set up different business rules, access control rules, routing rules, you can then do that in in this complementary Python file.
Got it. And so they would, you obviously have like an SDK, they're calling those specific functions to get the different rules set up. Could they also theoretically, if they wanted to, if they weren't using Terraform, they could set these same rules up in Python as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have really, I guess the short answer is like today, like no, like you use Terraform as the interface to create the flows, and you use the Python to kind of tune the guardrails. But obviously, like, well, the Terraform provider is just hitting an API that hypothetically could be exposed in other ways, though. So there's a path there, but like right now, no, we're really kind of focused on folks that like want to just use HCL to define the flows and then use this Python as the kind of a way to decorate and customize how the behaviors of the flow works. It's a good question. Yeah. Maybe I should, what I was going to do, Scott, it might help too, is like just actually modify this thing.
Oh, yeah.
To kind of show how that would work. And what I was going to do to modify it was I was highlighting here, this is fast tracked, right? And what I want to do is kind of update our is fast tracked to integrate with PagerDuty, because that's a very, this is a very, the reason I started with this as the example is this is a really common pattern where people are like, all right, I want to set up Sym, but I want to have options for on-call people where it goes through this flow, but they kind of get access in a fast-tracked way. So let's look at what would be involved in doing that. So that's what I'm going to do now is actually bring up that code we were looking at. And now our SDK, like when you're writing this Python stuff, like we've provided stuff in our SDK that kind of exposes these common integrations that we know people care about, like PagerDuty. Nice. So here, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to enable this PagerDuty check. Great. And I've already done the work. Let's see. So I've already done the work to set up PagerDuty and blah, blah, blah. Let's see. We're going to do a Terraform reply here. Now, one thing I should mention is like the way this Terraform is authenticating is Sym has this like SymFlow command line program. So you use SymFlow to kind of manage your provider's access to our platform. And then you can also use SymFlow to create bot tokens if you were going to do this process that we're doing here, but doing it from CI. So we've just kind of used a kind of standard Terraform apply pattern here, which we could put into any sort of CI system to make this change. And now I've got this.
And so the provider needs that SymFlow CLI.
So the provider either need to be running this locally and use the SymFlow CLI to log in, or you as an admin can use the SymFlow CLI to generate a token, and then that you can put that bot token like into your CI system, and then use that to authenticate the provider runs, as opposed to needing to have the SymFlow CLI around.
So in the background, the provider's checking for that value of that token, and if it doesn't see it, it looks for the CLI.
Yeah.
And says, can I run the CLI and get the token that way? And then if it doesn't do that, then it's like, okay, I need a token in some way. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Because I think the AWS provider, right? The AWS providers require an AWS CLI to run those, if I'm not mistaken.
I think if you, that's a similar kind of concept. Yeah. I think if you can, so yes, similar idea. So like, if you're hacking on stuff with AWS locally, it's just using whatever you've got locally, but clearly you can also configure your CI to use AWS without you having to kind of log in and do the thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we made this change. So hypothetically, now this user should have fast-tracked access because they're on call.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so fix while I'm on call. All right, let's see here. And okay, so you see here that we didn't get that approval block again. Instead, we just got the notification that the access went through.
Mm-hmm.
You see that it was fast-tracked, and that lines up, with the messaging that we put into that request hook here. We say fast-tracked AWS access, right?
Yeah.
So what's cool here to us is like the idea that like as a business, you could say, all right, we're making a new kind of a new business policy that on-call users can get fast direct access. Great. And now, right, you could point to the pull request where you've actually implemented that policy. And then you can see the activity in Slack that this is actually happening. And you can actually then see like, let's see, you can see on the back end here, like in this case, it's in Datadog. This is an activity that's just streaming in now. Like you kind of also have the audit log to kind of complete the circle that this, that we're kind of using this approach. So like every time we're interacting with Slack when it's with the Sym API through Slack in this case, when it's a request and approval and escalation, that's generating kind of this structured JSON event here that kind of has all the things like, okay, fix ticket 1, 2, 3, and who was the approver, who was the requester, blah blah blah, and you kind of get all that stuff, and you can then use this either just as a kind of an audit record, or you can use it to build dashboards. In this case, it's in Datadog. But what we think is kind of neat about this setup is like that kind of full circle of like, get this idea from a policy, I can point to the pull request where I implement it, and then I can see the activity in Slack and the kind of audit data coming back, through, in this case, in Datadog. And yeah, this is this kind of setup is what we're seeing, is what I think is driving a lot of people to try out Sym and mess around with this some more for their own workflows.
Cool. So how would they, I'm assuming there's some sort of free trial or what, how would they get started?
Yeah. Good question. So there actually is a nice free trial. So you can come here to our site and you can come in here and you can just click through to get started. Basically everything that we just showed in this demo, you can set up in that trial. I think we've spent a ton of time on our kind of docs and examples to kind of make that experience of kind of getting to what I showed today, kind of not a mission to Mars. I mean, the platform is this very extensible SDK. You can do some crazy stuff with it, but we want people to do that. Yeah. We also want them to be able to get started quickly. So like if you go to our, can't type today.
It's always hard to type in front of people, even when they're virtual.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so like you come here, kind of we walk you through kind of everything you need to know to get started. And I guess the other piece is we've got this kind of a kind of comprehensive examples repo of like basic and advanced examples of like how to use this thing with like lots of different, okay, how do I use this with AWS IAM? How do I do custom things like a Lambda or set up Datadog? How do I use this with GitHub? And then we have advanced ones that kind of get into some more fancy stuff that you can do with kind of our database integrations, blah, blah, blah. So between the examples and our getting started here, we've tried to make kind of a nice, smooth onboarding. And obviously, we're always happy to chat and talk to people when they've got questions or ideas for us.
Yeah. And so you were saying that AWS is your most common setup that folks are using for doing this, right?
I'd say yes. Common patterns are people come in and they're some sort of flavor of what I showed here with the some sort an AWS pain point. And then I'd say other common patterns, and kind of an asterisk to the AWS one is that, well, people have a ton of different ways that they manage access to their AWS. So when we talk about an AWS pain point, well, that might just be AWS. It might just be like AWS single sign-on or AWS IAM. It also actually might, in fact, be like Okta or one login or something like that, because maybe your access to AWS is really driven through Okta, or through one login, something like that. So in fact, when you set up Sym, your maybe initial problem you're trying to solve is AWS access, but you actually end up setting up a flow that you can then use for kind of temporary access to lots of stuff that might be managed by Okta or OneLogin. So we see some of that. And then I talked about our Lambda integration. People are kind of doing fun stuff with that. So, one thing to know about Sym is this is a hosted platform. So we host this workflow engine that works for a ton of use cases. We kind of have a nice overview here of like how we manage that kind of security relationship between our platform and your environment. We use cross-account roles when it comes to AWS stuff. We also have this integration with AWS Lambda. So what's kind of neat about that is then you can essentially model out and define workflows like we demoed today, have Sym manage Slack, business rules, the logging, and then as opposed to us on the Sym side, like actually, making a change in your target system, like adding a user to a group or whatever, we can invoke an AWS Lambda function that lives in your environment. And that Lambda gets like a JSON payload that looks similar to, what we saw in the reporting output. And what's kind of neat about that is now you can essentially write a very focused kind of on-off switch Lambda that can manage access to, some system that maybe, we either don't support or is kind of, not on the internet, like a database, for example. You don't have to give Sym like firewall permissions to access that database or anything. You need to give us the specific AWS permissions to invoke this Lambda function. And then so we can invoke this function just using the AWS public APIs, managed through IAM access. And then that function can kind of do the last mile of kind of toggling access. So the way people are using that, Scott, is often with databases. So because it was really common, people are like, oh, I kind of want to do this, but it's for some database use case. We built kind of template Lambdas for MySQL and Postgres so that people can kind of use our stuff and then get started really quickly on the Lambda side with one of our MySQL or Postgres templates. So those are some of the ways people are getting started today with our platform.
Nice. So you have in those templates the tunneling logic that you're like, yeah, you'll probably need this for MySQL, or probably need this to get to a MySQL data or a Postgres database type
exactly. Like, just like some very, very standard kind of Python implementations of, yes, here, you configure it with the database endpoint and, the appropriate credentials, and it like kind of maps out, okay, here's how you would create a temp user, or here's how you would, elevate an existing user, depending on, some people might have named users for folks in the database, and what they're trying to do is give them more privileges. Sometimes you just might be wanting to kind of create a one-off user. So we kind of help you with either pattern. It's kind of it's like a shared model, which I think makes sense because just like with these security workflows, one of the nice things about it being SDK driven is like everybody's specific particulars are different. Like the general concept of this peer reviewed or reviewed access makes sense, but like the way you'd want to do that for like your particular org is going to be slightly different. So the SDK lets you do that. And then similarly, like the way people manage database users is kind of like, yes, there are general patterns for this, but it's like, it's a little bit different. And now, you don't have to rethink that. You can use our Lambdas as starters, as accelerators really, to, get to the place where, we're managing database users just the way you want to.
I honestly think that's the next step. I've thought a lot about this with like developer experience and things like that, where like at first we said, here's an API, we're API first, you can connect to us, and everyone's like, yay. And then we started saying, well, I'd really like an SDK because then I can keep things in the same object. So then we started providing SDKs. I think that next step is this template type idea where we're saying, okay, not only do we have an API and SDKs, we're going to have these sets of templates where it's like, we know what your probably trying to do. And so here's here are the guardrails of how we think you should go about it. And it helps people get work done so much faster. So I totally agree with that idea that you want to provide as much information as possible to your users so that they can say, yeah, that's exactly the use case. Let me plug in these values and I'm going to use this code. I know what it's doing, but at least you thought through how it's supposed to work.
I mean, and Scott, I think this is also where Terraform helps because, again, like now because Sym is managed in Terraform, well, we can provide as a package the Terraform for Sym, along with the Terraform to provision this Lambda function, along with the source, the starter source code for that Lambda function. So, because Terraform kind of lets us plug these different stacks together, you can kind of make essentially cross-functional templates that all are kind of grounded in HCL to kind of actually create an end-to-end example with kind of all the pieces there. So as you were saying that just made me think of bringing up as I'm looking at our Lambda template, like it has some of the same files that I had in my demo, and then it has another template which is, this isn't Sym stuff, this is like provisioning a Lambda function, right? And then we include the kind of source code for that. So you don't again, we think this is a good starter, and we will manage and support this, as you have questions, and but like you're like, oh, I need my Lambda to do blah blah blah. Great. I mean, you have this template, and now essentially we've accelerated your implementation, but we haven't just tried to do the whole thing for you, because in the end, the way you're going to want to tune this is going to be specific to your org and your constraints, your conventions. So yeah, I agree with that. That trend towards templates makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it really does. I'm seeing it more and more in all, with all APIs. So in your journey that you've gone, I'm sure you had an idea when you started with Sym, you thought the world needs this. What was the thing you learned, the biggest surprise of like, oh, wow, didn't think of that you hit?
Yeah, the biggest surprise, I mean, I think the biggest surprise for me has been I think I was not sure when I started how comfortable people would be with like using Terraform for this stuff. It kind of made sense to me. So I had a surprise as we were bringing the product out, like just trying to like, initially the idea was like, what does my co-founder Adam, what do we think is cool and what would be useful? And then it was kind of like interesting to kind of get the validation from, that, okay, this is making sense to other people. I guess that would be one thing. I think one surprise is, it's a fun thing as a company, when we're building these this Terraform based product. One thing that's really interesting is it's like, our team, we have an amazing team of like backend engineers, and because to build the product we need amazing backend engineers. And one surprise for me was like realizing, oh, we have to level up our team on Terraform. Like even though we're building a Terraform provider, like the skills to build a provider and like think about scalable APIs and flexible design is like different than people that like know Terraform really well. So that was kind of a funny surprise. It's like, wait a sec. Oh yeah. Like, you, as you're building your company, like we had the kind of realization of like, okay, like we have everyone has to kind of level up on Terraform here, because that's different than just the APIs to create the Terraform. So that was a kind of a fun surprise. And it's been how that manifested itself is actually like all the docs and stuff and the examples that I showed you. We ended up kind of making that like a first class stream that the product team works on. So they track docs and examples there, like in the same, using the same process and the same teams and structure as we do for kind of like adding features to the API or whatever. So that that's been awesome. But it was a surprise to kind of realize, oh yeah, we have to think about that. So that was a big surprise.
Yeah. I can relate to that in the sense that when I joined PagerDuty about 4 years ago or so, I was introduced to the Terraform provider as this project that the community was working on, and it would be really great if PagerDuty could get involved. And so I dug in and learned how to work on it, and I was adding features, and I became the maintainer of the provider. And people started asking me questions about Terraform, like how to run Terraform. I'm like, I was like, hold on. I was like, Terraform, the provider, is like a bicycle. I can fix it. I can add things to it. I don't know how to ride it. Like, it's like we got to talk to other people on how to ride it.
Right.
And so, honestly, the roundtable meeting that I mentioned when I was in my announcements at the beginning of this, that was kind of the impetus for that meeting, because it was to get all the bike riders together, right? Like, get the folks who actually ride the bike every day to actually use it. And then they're the ones who can talk to each other about the best way of doing things. I was like, I know how the provider works and how it works with the API, but I hadn't used Terraform as a user. And so knowing that you had to find people that not only had to level up on Terraform and could write the back end for stuff, that's definitely something I can relate to.
Well, it's been fun. And, now we actually, and it's just like, and I should say the other thing that we did pretty early on that's been helpful in that regard is that we use Sym to manage our own infrastructure. So like, if you need when you need to get sensitive access to prod, or we use it actually for some deploy gates as well. Like, we're using it every day. And so like, if there's issues or like, there's a kind of a good feedback loop internally as well, which has also helped with the learning curve for sure.
Absolutely. I'm going to drop, I have symops.com. Is there any other link that we should drop in the chat for folks to give them? Should I give them the free trial one?
You can get there right from that page.
It's true. It's right there at the top. So they know how to find that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. Jon, thanks so much for being on the show today. I learned a lot, and it's cool to see the solution that you have there. And thanks again. And appreciate you being here.
It was my pleasure. Great to talk.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us today on Terraform Time. And for all of you, wishing the rest of you an uneventful rest of your day.